It is now a given that no matter what happens in the current standoff at the LAC with China, India will have to recalibrate and rebalance its strategic approach to China and also have a military doctrine that not only deters China but also Pakistan with it in the long run when it comes to securing the borders of this country. That's the subject of Simply Nitin this week. I am Nitin Gokhale. So how does India deal with a more assertive and a more aggressive China? Not just on the borders, but also in various other domains, at the international forums, in trade, in other policies as far as the South Asian region is concerned. China is now trying to be more belligerent than ever before. So how does India deal with it? Let's make no mistake, the LAC standoff that is completing exactly 7 months today is not just about land grabbing or territory here or territory there, but it's also about China trying to keep India down militarily, strategically, politically and diplomatically. That's the challenge that India faces. Fortunately, because of this 7-month-long standoff, already the longest in India-China history since 1947, the decision makers in India and the intelligentsia have now realized that it is not Pakistan but China which is a larger challenge. Pakistan, if at all, is a subset of the China challenge. So I'm not going to talk about what India should do strategically, economically or diplomatically, but I'm going to concentrate in this episode on what India's army must do to rebalance and recalibrate its doctrine, its deployment and its force levels. Let's look at it in a larger context. If you look at the map of India and its borders, the land borders, it is dominated by the Pakistani border, which is the IB and the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, and the LAC or the McMahon line with China in Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, Uttarakhand and Ladakh. Now, the Indian Army's orientation for long has been to have large deployment of forces along the western border. Remember, there are 3 strike corps meant for Pakistan, apart from the defensive or pivot corps which are deployed along the Pakistan border are meant for Pakistan border. Not that the deployment on the China border is any less, but compared to the size that Pakistan has or China has, the imbalance in the deployment of the forces is glaring. I think it's time that the Indian Army rebalances these forces. How can it do it? It's my own assessment, but of course the military will have its own plans and of course the doctrine or strategy to deal with China. Let's look at how China is dealt with right now. If you come from east, Arunachal Pradesh, then come to Sikkim, go through Uttarakhand and then come to Ladakh, there are 2 corps of the Indian Army deployed in the northeast. The 3 corps based in Dimapur, which looks after rest of Arunachal Pradesh minus West Kameng and Kameng district or the Kameng area or Kameng sector in Arunachal Pradesh, which is in West Arunachal Pradesh. That is looked after by 4 corps. Now, Sikkim, which is a very small portion of the boundary with China, has an entire corps, the 33 corps based in Siliguri, to look after Sikkim. Uttarakhand, by contrast, which has a longer border than Sikkim with China, has no corps but just maybe 3 independent brigades which are deployed or thinly deployed on the Uttarakhand border. And of course, we know in Ladakh what is happening now. There is the 14 corps based in Leh, which has now got 2 full divisions looking after the entire 870 kilometer odd LAC in eastern Ladakh. Now, how can this be recalibrated? By contrast, if you look at the Pakistani border, or the border with Pakistan, there are 3 strike corps, one based in Ambala, the 2 strike corps, 1 strike corps based in Mathura, and 21 strike corps based in Bhopal. By contrast, for China, there is a half-done or half-raised mountain strike corps, 17 mountain strike corps based in Panagarh, which is in West Bengal. So what should India really do on the land borders? In my view, I think the Sikkim border is quite secure and quite well taken care of by the 33 Corps. But that border may not require a full corps as 33 Corps is right now. Some elements from that corps, maybe 2 brigades, should be actually deployed in eastern Arunachal Pradesh under 3 Corps, which is based in Dimapur, as I mentioned. The existing divisions, the 2 div in Dinjan and the 56 div in Lekhabali, are not enough to cover the large area of rest of Arunachal Pradesh. Maybe 2 more brigades are required in the eastern Arunachal Pradesh area. Similarly, in Uttarakhand, as I said, there are 3 independent brigades which actually are not sufficient. So maybe 1 full division plus 1 independent brigade is required for Uttarakhand. Already, I think reassessment of the order of battle is on in the Indian Army. Reassessment and recalibration is on. So maybe the 14th division based in Dehradun, which is otherwise a rapid division meant for the desert warfare, is being converted into a mountain division for the future in Uttarakhand. So the central sector, or the middle sector as it is called, requires more attention from the Indian Army, which I am sure will happen in the coming months and years. Similarly, in Ladakh, whenever this standoff ends, the temptation would be to keep the existing 2 divisions and maybe more brigades which have come from 15 Corps in Srinagar and 16 Corps in Nagrota to be retained there. But that's something that the Indian Army may not want to do and should not do, because the LOCization of LAC, and I want to explain that what it means, that permanent deployment of ground forces along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh is not very advisable because of the topography, because of the weather, and because of the cold conditions that exist from November onwards till April. As it is, we know how difficult it is to stay at those heights and those altitudes of 15,000 plus. If troops are stationed permanently in those locations, then their balance between their peace station postings and field postings will become skewed. And therefore, the Indian Army will have to now think of keeping during the winters, whenever this standoff is resolved, after that, keeping maybe 4 brigades along the 870 kilometer odd LAC in eastern Ladakh, and rotate 2 more brigades from the plains, which could be the brigades in the 9 Corps, which is based in Yol. That is something that they'll have to look at, because otherwise keeping so many forces in Ladakh may not be something which gives the optimum utilization to the Indian Army. How does the Corps commander or the army commander in Northern Command and the army chief in Delhi plan it? How do they plan that? It's up to them. But the fact is, India must look at China as a bigger challenge, reorient not just its deployment from the western border to the northern borders, but also the thinking. With Pakistan, India needs to have power which deters Pakistan from doing any misadventure on the western border, which means have retained strike capability, and the old thinking that India has to go into Pakistan 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers, whole territory to have any bargaining power against Pakistan in event of a hot war should, I think, be abandoned now. Only shallow thrusts and pinpointed operations are probably the way forward with Pakistan. With China, India needs to have long-range vectors, artillery firepower, special forces which are swifter, which are easy to transport from one end of the border to the other through various airlift capabilities which are now being enhanced, and of course better surveillance, better reconnaissance, better intelligence on the China border. It's not an easy task. It's going to cost money. It's going to cost a lot of time, because the entire reorientation from the western border to the northern borders is a change of mindset. And in an organization that largely believes in being status quoist, this is going to be a major challenge. Not the deployment per se, but the change of mindset. And I think that is going to be something that the army chief and of course the other planners with him will have to look at. We will talk about what can be done in the maritime domain, because that's where China is weaker and vulnerable, given its long sea lanes of communication and the dependence on maritime traffic for its energy and its exports. Let me say this again in conclusion. What China has done in the past 7 months is not just about grabbing land or some territory here or there. It's about keeping India off balance and ensuring that India doesn't climb the ladder in the global pecking order. While China has its ambition to become the preeminent power in the international arena, it does not want one of its neighbors, one of its large neighbors, that is India, to also equally gain higher status in the global pecking order. And that's the reason why China is doing what it is doing. Of course, it is doing the similar tactics, adopting similar tactics, even against smaller nations like Bhutan. And of course, there is an angle that if they put pressure on Bhutan, India will be also drawn in, and there will be some kind of a confrontation or skirmish. And then, of course, China can keep India again engaged in some kind of a localized conflict or a skirmish. But it is doing the same belligerent act against smaller nations in the ASEAN region and against, of course, Japan. And therefore, you saw the coming together of the United States, Australia, Japan and India in the exercise Malabar, or the coming together of the 4 countries called quadrilateral grouping, or Quad as it is known. But all that we'll talk about in maybe a future episode. But remember this, the Indian Army is now at an inflection point. It needs to change its doctrine, reassess its force levels, and the deployment of the forces in the land domain, if it has to take on the China challenge with greater vigor and greater clarity. Before I go, I need to explain to you, in case you are not aware of what is a brigade size, what is a division size and what is a corps size. Of course, the lowest formation in any combat unit is a battalion, which is about 1,000 men strong. One battalion of 1,000 men, then there are 3 battalions to a brigade normally. 3 brigades comprise of 1 division. 3 divisions make up for a corps, and 3 corps normally make up for a command. And of course, then all these commands together is the entire Indian Army, which is 1.2 million strong or 12 lakh strong. India, remember, has 7 commands, Indian Army. One of them is of course a training command called the RTRAC, the Army Training Command. Rest of them are divided into Northern, Central, Eastern, Western, South and Southwestern. These are the Indian Army commands. This is important to understand before I go, and that's why I thought I will tell you all this. Of course, keep liking us on our social media platforms, keep sending comments and feedback, and of course I'll come back with another edition of Simply Nitin next week. Until then, goodbye.